here as always. This is a part 2 of a 2-part series. And so there are a lot of you that were on here last week. For those of you who were not on this call last week, I'm going to just go over a little bit about what we said. But part 1 is in the library section of the website, so you can find it there. So this process of ascension is a process that requires some attention. It's not a gift. It's not a free lunch. It's not a hope that somebody comes and taps you on the head and poof, you go into a ball of light and ascend and walk through walls. So far, I haven't seen it happen that way. It's possible, but I would suggest you don't hang out for that possibility in your universe. So creating this space, this ascension process, this is a journey. It's not a short weekend course. It is not something you read in a book. It is not something that you hang out with a bunch of people, talk about, and it happens. It really is 100% totally about you putting your attention on a consciousness and holding your awareness there and then kind of walking this pathway. Some assembly required. It's not complicated, but it is a complete rearrangement of an awful lot of what you know. So as we talked about last week, we kind of started to talk about the fall of consciousness and how there really was no bad angel, there was no war, there was no battles going on. There was not even a really catastrophic event in some ways. There was creation. And in the process of creation, like lots of things you do, cook a good meal that you've never cooked before, sometimes the meal doesn't quite come out exactly like you were hoping it would come out. And so in that case, you go back and you like the idea, so you go back and you try it again. You take a look at, well, I didn't read the menu, the instructions properly, and it was a little too salty, and it called for a teaspoon of salt, not a tablespoon of salt. And all of a sudden you begin to realize where and how you fine-tune this creation. And so what is defined as the fall of consciousness, to a large extent, in a very big perspective, on a universal perspective, is still a experiment of creation. The creator is all about creating. And so that process of creation is constantly in the mix. Most of all that is non-physical. This aspect that we understand ourselves in, this little spot of sand in all that is, physicalness is really, as numbers of conversations I've had with Metatron and Uriel and Michael and others, this concept of physicalness was an experiment. It simply was part of what creation is. And so as physicalness came to be, and it doesn't look like what it looks like now when it started out, it's all about density. So one of the things that, as a definition, consciousness is all that is in compression when it comes to physicalness. So as it started out, there was nothing physical as we would define physical. And there began to be a lot of excitement according to those in the storytelling. And they began to create more compression, and the more compression of density, the more compression of consciousness, the denser the consciousness became. And it got to a particular point where it kept becoming more and more compressed. And one of the things that has occurred in that compression, particularly as it began to move into the realms that we define as Lemuria, and then another compression of Atlantis, and then this whole compression kind of where we're playing, when that all came about, there was less and less room for fluidity, mobility, expansion, because consciousness in that density could only hold so much. So we wind up experiencing ourselves right here in the most compressed aspect of consciousness that, I mean, I guess you could be a rock, but we're really not talking about that. This aspect of where consciousness has the capacity to create. And so this aspect, what we call third dimension, is about as compressed as possible. One of the things that happened in the experimenting is where the concept of fall of consciousness came. Again, there was no bad guy, is the experiment kind of didn't work in a way. It's as if you keep compressing a spring and compressing a spring and compressing a spring, and then finally if you push on it just the wrong angle, it snaps, it expands, it kind of goes back into its original state. But when, as the story goes, when this fall of consciousness happened, that snapping was something that created a lot of separation. Things that happened in order for this to not really unwind, there was a new structure created, a very dense structure that was able to keep things more or less in place. But in the process of that aspect of separation came into play. So the mental emotional body never was meant to be two bodies, and it separated. Aspects of duality, all those words that we know, really began to unravel in third dimension. As dense as this compression is, it was far denser prior to where we are right now. This is really where we are right now, is very much the evolution of getting out of that very rigid compression. When I have my conversations with Yeshua and in this body work, Mastering Alchemy, you'll hear him say in numbers of the conversations back and forth that you get to listen to between us, Yeshua said really clearly, what I came to do, I did not accomplish. I did a lot, but what I came to do, the density at my time was so extreme that I could not accomplish what you are all now accomplishing. And so this journey over the last many tens of thousands of years is such that it's really beginning to be a place where this ability to step back into a fully conscious state of no separation, oneness, is exactly what we're talking about at this minute. And that's what this course of evolution, that if you're listening to this, you're on this course of evolution. So Ascension is a simple, expanded word that really just means evolution, your particular evolution. You are becoming conscious of being conscious. So on this journey, one of the things that happens, though, is for the most part, when you look around on the street, any city in the world, you see people who are unconscious of being unconscious. They don't have a clue. Now, not bad people, they just don't have a clue. The next kind of part of that evolution, and it's where many of you are, I am, others are in a lot of ways, and you pass through this relatively quickly as you put attention on this ascension level we're talking about. But for the most part, and it sounds funny, is you are becoming conscious of being unconscious. It's a huge step. You start to realize these habits, these beliefs, these patterns that I live every day, these words that come out of my mouth every day, all of a sudden you start to realize, why did I say that? And this isn't really working. And I'd never paid attention to this habit that I just do every day, but I'm all of a sudden noticing it irritates other people, or it's disrespectful, or it's simply something that doesn't support me. And as you begin to become conscious, you're going to find a lot of those patterns, those beliefs, those thoughts, those habits, those emotions that run through the body. Part of that becoming conscious of those type of things, there is a great find that comes about. And in that find, you begin to realize that most of the thoughts that you think during your day in that state of unconscious, of being unconscious, and most of the beliefs that you walk around and hold are not yours. Many of the things that you say have nothing to do with you at all as a spiritual being. They are habits, patterns that we pick up from the mom, dad, teacher, minister of life who says, this is how it is. You do this, you do that, you go to this school, you talk to those people, you hang out over here, you don't go over there. This is acceptable, this is right, wrong, good, bad, and this is what you should do. When you start to become conscious of that level of unconscious action, you start to become conscious of being conscious. You begin to interrupt a lot of those patterns. You begin to apply tools. You begin to identify that there's a place at the edge of your aura, which from the edge of your aura to your heart is you, and everything on the other side of that edge of the aura is Shakespeare's theater to entertain you. But when you don't know where that line is, and it's really not a line, it's just a point of delineation, but when you don't know where it is, how many times, think about it, how many times have you walked into a situation happy, and because other people were unhappy or grumbling, all of a sudden within a very short period of time, you're going, me too. And you're unhappy, you forgot about being happy, and you're in a space where you're in agreement with a lot of noise that many times has absolutely nothing to do with you. So, as we talked about last week, how do you get out of that? How do you begin to become conscious of being conscious? And so I defined a number of steps in this process of moving along this path of your evolution. We talked about platforms of words. We talked about some of the very simple tools. We talked about the rays of creation. And we talked about something that I referred to as the triads, the reconfiguration of the chakra system as you understand the chakra system. So one of the very fundamental things in regard to these triads is, in simple ways, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always got. Or that whole concept of being crazy, doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. Well, one of the things about the chakra system is when that fall of consciousness happened and so much of the separation occurred, the chakra system really took a hit. And it's, in a way, when you begin to operate in a much more consistent, systematic structure of consciousness, and you look back at this chakra system that we've kind of grown up with, those going through waking up in this spiritual space, those 7 chakras simply don't really function all that well. It's amazing that we are doing as well as we can. They're fractured, they're broken, they're structured in ways that is very disconnected. So one of the very first things that happens is, and this was a gift in about 2007, that it was the time where Master Kuthumi, it was the one time I've seen his expression ecstatically joyful. Master Kuthumi is very wonderful and very specific, doesn't laugh a lot, but very, very specific, very helpful. He was ecstatic, and his words were simply, we did not believe that the Creator would make this gift available for a long time. And so the triads began to be taught. So the rearrangement, I'm going to kind of go through how do you get to that light body and what does that look like. So that's the rest of this period of time. We're going to play in the next 45 minutes. So the triads, to start this off, is a reconfiguration, a reutilization, let's say, of, in the first triad, 3 pieces, tri-3 triad, there are 3 centers, the 4th chakra, the thymus gland, and the 5th chakra. When you begin to utilize those in a configuration that changes, and a whole set of awarenesses occur. This first triad is the key to everything, because as you begin to spin this center, and spinning is not about left, right, forward, or back. Spinning is much more in this term. It's much more like what happens when you have a rheostat, a light switch on the wall, that you raise it up and the light becomes brilliant in the room, or you raise it down and it dulls out. It gets smaller, it gets lesser. So this spinning concept is much about a command that starts to create this radiance of light into a vibrational field of consciousness. And so those three centers, fourth chakra, thymus gland, fifth chakra, become reoriented into a different configuration. Second triad, located in the sixth chakra, the pineal gland, and the medulla oblongata, which is a portion of the brain. Really, really important, but very much disconnected in that fall of consciousness. So those three centers also begin to spin. And then the third center is the seventh chakra, the eighth chakra that's, let's say, roughly a foot above your head, and then what's called the soul star. And that's above the eighth chakra, but not in the alignment of the chakras. It's really kind of just off to the left a little bit. It's not in a straight line. Those three centers begin to spin and operate. As they all begin to spin into an alignment, something happens that you begin to activate or become conscious in what's called the unified field. Now, many people think they know what the unified field is, but it's mostly, as I have observed over years, it's an intellectual concept, and it pretty much stops real quickly. It's this, and then there's not a lot to say after that. It's an intellectual concept. It's not an intellectual concept at all. And when you begin to spin these triads in particular configurations, this unified field of consciousness starts to become activated. And as that happens, you start to have a level of consciousness. You begin to function in a decompression of consciousness. So as that happens, you begin to have access to lots of other things. But simultaneously, in the building of this light body to move into that unified field, there's numbers of things that have to happen. One of those things is that mental, emotional body has to be brought back into a singular alignment. Now, where we play in Mastering Alchemy, one of the ways that that begins to happen is you can't take your baggage with you on this journey into the fifth dimension. I'll talk about fifth dimension in a minute. But the concept of taking your baggage and with you is you can't do that. It doesn't work. You can't take your resentment, your jealousy, your rage, your anger, all of those pains. I'm not okay. I'm not attractive. I don't fit. Nobody likes me. You have to leave that behind. Can't take it with you on this journey, period. End of discussion. So the next question is, then how do I get out of that stuff? Well, as we talk about often in a lot of these free lectures, that whole sense of I'm not okay, when you start to be able to define your space, that edge of your aura, center of your head, grounding your body, beginning to observe, choose, and act rather than shoot, ready, aim, and then have to apologize for it. When you begin to have conceptual awareness of yourself in a reconfigured set of concepts, and one of those concepts that is really important, we touched on this last week, is these sets of words. Now, words are simply utterances of language that, in fact, are just vibrational sound templates, happy, whatever. But when you don't have a sense of yourself, you're in a reactionary third-dimensional state. Somebody says something and You just have already said half of what's coming out of your mouth before you ever think about it. Now, none of you do that, but you know people who do that. In that space, one of the ways of getting out of this third dimensional, fourth dimensional reactionary state of unconsciousness is beginning to build these platforms of words. Now, what I mean by that is, as we begin to play, I would say to you, do you know what certainty is? And generally a person would go, oh, sure, I know what certainty is. And then the next question is, no, not in your head what certainty is. Not do you know what it is. Do you know what it is? And so, well, what do you mean by that? So if I said to you, and some of you haven't played this game, do it right now. So take a breath, close your eyes, and would you feel in the body certain? Would you let the vibration of certainty just begin to be a feeling? Once you begin to play there and you take a breath, well, the body will kind of want to sit up, the shoulders go back, you take a little deeper breath, you get more clarity in the body, you get in present time. All of those things, all the present time, clarity in the body, those awarenesses bring you into that present time space where you have choice. Now, choice is a big deal, and it's something that most people just take for granted. But choice is really a key to getting out of that state of third dimension. When you begin to play in words like certain, capable, seniority, this is who I am, graciousness, think about graciousness. It's a word that some people occasionally speak, but graciousness is a fifth dimensional experience. It's not something that you experience virtually walking around in your everyday world. So when you begin to build these platforms of words and you start to structure them in geometry, because everything in the physical universe has a geometry attached to it. We play with the simplest of geometries because that's what makes it all work comfortably. Triangles. You can expand on that, but a simple triangle is the fundamental geometry. So when you start to put words like certain, capable, and senior together as a sense of your presence, you function differently. You become conscious, and you become aware in present time. There you have choice to act as you choose. So that fundamental piece of information I just said is probably one of the most significant transformations a person can go through in the process, in the beginning of the ascension process. And not the beginning, all the way through the process. Because words and sound templates and vibrations of light are what compressed. And when you begin to hold words like gracious, kindness, certainty, capable, seniority, you begin to take mastery over that unconscious reactionary state. Very big deal, these little triangles of words. So effectively, you begin to build this platform. Why that's so important is because as you start to hold yourself in these words and you're conscious, you start to begin to be aware of your habits, your beliefs, and that baggage that doesn't support you. Here's where it becomes very interesting also. That baggage, I'm not okay, whatever format you carry it around in, has been a gift that somebody else handed you in their bad lifetime one moment. What's wrong with you? Why are you so stupid? How come you can't do it right? You're never going to amount to anything. That's a really ugly shirt you just went and bought. All of those kind of statements have nothing to do with you until you decide to accept that gift and then ask the next question. What did I do wrong? How come they said that to me? What's wrong with me. Now, what makes that so difficult is nothing is wrong with you, nor has there ever been anything wrong with you. The challenge is we accept somebody else's gift, opinion, bad moment, and then we try to figure out it as it relates to us. But as little kids, we can't discern the difference between being okay and somebody's bad day. So as you begin to play as an adult, and you start to play on these triangles of words, and you start to begin to assess yourself, not from an emotional reaction of why did they say that, but from a place that recognizes this question I've been trying to figure out all my life, it has nothing to do with me. At that point, it gets very interesting, because these rays of creation, these tools that become available to you, they are applied in ways that don't work through the emotions, and they don't work through challenge, they don't work through intellectualizing. They just simply, would you like to remove that block that sits on the table that doesn't work for you? Would you like to take it off the table and be done with it? It's that simple. But it takes a little bit of practice because you don't believe it's that simple. So when you start to recognize becoming conscious of being conscious, you start to have these awarenesses. You start to interrupt the habits, the beliefs. Now this is where one of the most amazing parts of all this journey is that I've found over all these years I've been playing in this. The wiring is not connected. Simply means somebody says something, you go, I don't understand. Really simple. The wire's not connected. So they say something again, and you go, oh, I got it. All that happened was the wiring got connected, and you got it. Lots of the wiring is disconnected in the fall of consciousness, in separation, in those vibrations of I'm not okay. But what is so fascinating to me is once the wiring gets connected, once you realize I'm okay in this little piece that I'm dealing with, whatever it is, I'm okay, you don't ever remember again that you weren't okay in that place. What was in that place has been overridden by you beginning to know you. And whatever was there before simply gets short-circuited, neutralized, cleared away, but there's no recall or reference point to that little piece where you've walked around being not okay. Now think about that for a minute. What if you could simply begin to recognize yourself as okay, and in the process of that enjoying words like happy, certain, capable, and fun, laughter, gracious, kind, appreciation, gratitude, keep on going. What if you could recognize that's what you really are? And then recognize that all this stuff that I've been playing around with all my life disappears the moment I recognize I'm okay. Now, I'm not selling you anything. I'm just telling you what happens. So that process begins to unfold. This is where, a minute ago I said we were at that combining that mental, emotional body. This is where it gets interesting, because now you're starting to become conscious of being conscious in realms where you have access but very seldom have any awareness. I'm too busy being not okay. It's as if all of a sudden you look up. So in these places with a little bit of instruction, you start to draw on structural aspects of light and sound and color. And these color patterns begin to do very specific things. For example, something that's referred to as a color coding. Coding not as in painting the wall a color, but as in the word code. C-O-D-I-N-G, coding. When you begin to draw these color codings, for example, as you begin to play at this, now I'm just not giving you a formula, I'm just touching on pieces of the journey, but when you begin to apply that red color coding, and you bring it into the chakras, that the lower 3 chakras particularly, that have been already reconstructed into a functional unit, not part of the triads yet, but functional unit, you start to find that the claustrophobic nature of those chakras, the littleness of who I am, the littleness of my decision making, the littleness of my sense of myself, those chakras begin to expand. Much more fluidness, choice, ease. Red coating. Blue coating begins to smooth out the emotional body. A lot of those emotions and reactions that we have nothing to do with you. And as you begin to start to recognize these words and these triangles, you start to find that that emotional body and the mental body begin to observe, choose, and then act with some intelligence rather than reaction. You begin to find that you have a thought, and then you can draw an emotion to it consciously rather than in reaction. Now think about how many times something doesn't go right and you are immediately engaged in resentment, anger, reaction, throwing energy, whatever it may be, and then you don't even think about it. In this case, when you start to build that mental, emotional body, you get to observe the circumstance. You get to have, it's almost like time stops, and you can assess how you would like to engage, and then you can bring an emotion into it that you would like to use in the engagement. This is another gigantic piece. And so when you begin to play with these color codings, and there's others, that mental emotional body begins to reconfigure itself. Now, at the same time in this process, something else begins to happen. You start to access the Sacred Heart. And the Sacred Heart at the beginning of this journey is in the chest, is in the thymus center, is in the etheric body. We'll get to that in a minute. And it has a destination or a location. But as you begin this ascension process, the Sacred Heart is a state of being, not a location. Oh, but at the beginning, anchoring it in the chest, having a reference point is very, very valid and helpful. So that Sacred Heart begins to have some very interesting aspects. One of them is that in the Sacred Heart, as you begin to bring your attention there, you begin to go into the Sacred Heart, experience that energy, there's a number of things that happen. There is a single flame that sits in the Sacred Heart, quiet, small. It is the living light of the Creator. And as you begin to access these pieces of you, becoming you, that living light begins to become very accessible. It has multiple effects. It's also in that living light that you begin to open up the consciousness. The compression begins to be much more open. In that decompressing of that Sacred Heart area, you begin to access a lot of information, but you mostly begin to recognize that I'm in this world, but I'm not of this world. Now, that doesn't mean you came from someplace else. It simply means the games, the noise, the anger, the rage, the rapes, the murders, the survival level, the wars have nothing to do with you. Nothing. But it's the noise of the day. So how do you step out of that? There's another aspect that comes into play here. There's another place that comes into this. You know, Yeshua said that way back when he was really working in that extreme density that he came to open up, and he was very successful at the pieces of opening up the density, but not in what we're talking about here. So in this space, as you start to play in that Sacred Heart level, he said there will be a return of the Christ consciousness to this planet. In 2011, that occurred. And it occurred in a way that is actually quite magnificent. It wasn't a man or a religion, Christness. It's not either of those two things. It is an aspect of the Creator. And one of the things that happened in that living light of the Creator, in that sanctuary in the Sacred Heart, there is what's referred to as a pink diamond. It's an aspect of love, a very specific aspect of love. And in that pink diamond, as you become familiar with it, and you do early on in all this work, there was placed a gold, brilliant gold star tetrahedron, the matrix of the Christ consciousness. And that star tetrahedron has been very expanding over the last 5-6 years now, or 4 years. So it's begun to hold more and more of this consciousness in that Christ nature. It gets very brilliant. But as you begin to play, I'm jumping ahead, that living light of the Creator and that Christed matrix merge in the Sacred Heart, you also begin to draw in the love of the Creator. And this level of love is magnificent. It's enormous. It is not about, oh, I love you, I love my dog, oh, my best friend, I love my best friend. Those are very tiny aspects, important, but very tiny aspects that are very limited because of the restrictions in the fall of consciousness and the third dimension, fourth dimensional reality. To a great extent, in that consciousness of being unconscious, that's about all you get, because you can't think past it in that restricted, limited state. But as you begin to play here, this nature of love begins to have a tremendous power to it. Now, this is a power that doesn't have force, doesn't push. There's no sword that's swung. It's simply a presence. And in that presence, there begins to be a relationship, first triad, where you start to know yourself. And one of the things that will happen is in that fifth chakra is the will of the Creator. That aspect that wills creation into creation. And that aspect of that will and your will begin to merge. And it's in that merging where your sense of presence begins to be really present. There's a strength. There's no force. There's just simply, this is who I am. No hesitations, no wobbles. It begins to be a presence. You. In that presence, something begins to also happen. Is this aspect in the third dimension, the noise, the linear time, the worry, the hope, and the past and the future. In that heart space, there is no fertile ground for the soul. So mostly the concept of soul is simply a concept. There's no interaction with the soul. Higher self even doesn't have much interaction with you as a consciousness in those levels of anger and resentment, and I'm not okay and I don't deserve and all that. So as that heart space begins to open up, the fertileness for the soul and you to merge as one begins to be present. Very big deal. You are the soul. Well, you are an aspect of soul, having the soul's having an experience. But here, you and the soul begin to know what the soul knows. Ascension evolution, expansion. The density gets less and less compressed. This is a place also where the engagement with the archangelic realm, the lords of light, I should define that. In these realms, it's like having a job and having numbers of jobs. It's like you have administrative functions, and you have creative functions, and you have manufacturing functions, and you have committees that you participate in. And in one committee, you're the chairperson of the committee. In another committee, you're a member of the committee. So if you can think about it in that simple terms, beings like Metatron and Michael and Melchizedek and others, these are the archangelics and the lords of light and other job titles. But they are very much engaged in this process. So it's in this place where this unified field continues to expand. The density, the compression of consciousness begins to decompress, and your awareness begins to expand. Now here's where it's like, oh, I need to tell you this piece, because it's like, as wonderful as all this sounds, something begins to happen here as you start to step into this fifth dimensional space. Now, fifth dimension is a place that is very fluid, very mobile. It has lots of flexibility, and it operates, oddly enough, in those words: happy, gracious, kind, respect, dignity, appreciation, laughter, humility, integrity. All those words, think about those words. That's what the fifth dimension is. There's nothing that's unsafe, so safety is not even a word. There's nothing to distrust, so trust isn't even really a word in that place. You leave that behind. You begin to engage in co-creation and cooperation and admiration of others, respect, uplifting, helpfulness. Isn't that what you want? That's what the fifth dimension is all about. However, when you start to play in that, and these realms begin to open up, and this awareness begins to open up, you also begin to enter into levels of consciousness, fields of awareness that do not function in words or language. You begin to find on this journey, one of the things that happens is you start to lose interest in some of those old things that you were engaged in. You don't go to the bar anymore because it's like, it's not interesting anymore, those kind of things. But here, you begin to start to have access to realms of consciousness that don't operate in words or language as you know it. But it does begin to operate in the languages, multiple dialects of light. Takes a little while to start to figure that out. In fact, my observation is, for most, it really doesn't even begin to happen until that light body is installed. That's where the wiring and the higher access to the brain, the higher access to the fields begin to become useful. You begin to create from a sixth and a seventh dimensional place. You begin to operate in a way where you are an individual reflection, unique individual reflection of the Creator. And you are a consciousness with all that is. It's like being a drop of water and being the great ocean at the same time. Begins to be accessing those non-physical aspects of the dimensions. You become conscious. It's a very expanding, different, changing reality. So in order to do that, there are numbers of steps that go on. You've basically been building all the platforms and the templates. So in a way, you've been building this light body. But when you start to get to this point, you have an opportunity. You put enough in place. You've begun to have an awareness of the multiple levels of bodies, if you would. They're really giant templates of consciousness, but you have in addition to this physical body, and that's the last one to get engaged, you have an etheric body where all the chakras are located. That etheric body is the blueprint of the physical body. But over time and other falls of consciousness and all of the things that you bumped around in, there's been distortions between the blueprint and your experiences, and words like fear and anger and rage and all that came in. And so there's smudges on one reflection to the other reflection, and there's a lot of distortion. So as you begin to bring that mental and emotional body into balance, you begin to open up these fields. That etheric body begins to operate through the triads in a very expanded way. You begin to merge the mental and the emotional body, one, with the etheric body. You begin to engage with the aspect of soul and spirit, two different things. They begin to merge. You begin to have access to the oversoul. You begin to have access to the Christ oversoul. And you start to begin to, through specific instructions, real simple, you just have to do the work. Pay attention, do what's being asked, very simple. You begin to merge, weave together these bodies. But as it happens, you begin to elevate. They begin to operate as one body, but not the physical body. So you're building this structure of consciousness. You're bringing all of you together into a functioning consciousness. So, and it elevates. It becomes very enlightened. At the same time, you begin to work with the physical body again, more so, and you start to change how the brain functions. You start to be able to draw this living light in through that third triad into the second triad. You begin to change the neurons in the cellular structure, the glandular fluids, the chemicals in the body. You begin to create in the neuron structures of communication that alter the atomic molecular structure of the formation of chemicals and fluids. You basically change the computer software. It begins to direct the physicalness to operate differently. You begin to build the light body. In that process, there are then numbers of steps. The meridian system, very, very important. It is an interfacing system between the physical body and the mental and the etheric body, and this blended unison of oneness that you've just created. So you begin to change that interface. This word interface is a big deal. How the physical body interacts with this higher combined state of consciousness. You begin to play in what's referred to as morphic fields. Morphic fields are also interfaces. I mean, think about an interface as you have a round door over here and you have a square door over there, and you need to connect them. And so one end of the interface is square and one end of the interface is round, and you put them together and it works very smoothly. The morphic fields have different levels of atomic electromagnetic structure on one end, and it will change the electromagnetic structure on another end, so that combination, that merging goes together. So here is where 7 layers of the light body begin to be built. The consciousness is that of the Creator. You begin to have that interaction with the Creator, with all that is, everything, all that is, consciously. Now, remember I said it's not in English and Spanish and German, it's not in words, and it's not in language, as you understand. That's very dense, very compressed. This is very expansive. So these 7 layers, if you would think it as kind of the first layer is a circle and it gets put in place, and then it raises up into a little bigger circle, but it fits right into place. And then the second fits right into the third bigger circle, third into the fourth bigger circle. You begin to change in this process of the light body, very specifically, the DNA coding systems. You begin to draw 7 strands of DNA, not into the physical body, only one more, not into the physical body, but into this unified field of that light body that you're building begins to operate in these 7 strands of DNA. Non-physical, most of them, functional in light, sound, and enormously expansive, connected into all that is. There's another set of aspects called axonal lines. These axonal lines are kind of like dark fields in science and quantum physics. They are the vibrational field that connects to every vibrational field. It's in that space that you begin to have access to numbers of additional levels of consciousness. And some of these levels of consciousness are referred to as ultra-terrestrials. These are not the extraterrestrials. These are not the little gray guys and the Pleiadians and the Arcturians and all of those. These are the levels of consciousness in the unified field that have not participated in the fall of consciousness. Now, let me go back a little bit here. The fall of consciousness happened throughout many, 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 many universes, many levels of living consciousness. I won't call them human beings, but living consciousness in many forms of physical and non-physical structure were affected by this fall of consciousness. In that fall of consciousness, much restriction was created, and in some places, total restriction was created. But these beings, these ultra-terrestrial beings, were not affected by the fall of consciousness. And in real terms, the fall of consciousness was just a little tiny thing relating mostly to physicalness and those layers of non-physicalness. But in the big picture of things, a little drop of water in the big, gigantic oceans. But it's your drop of water, and it's your oceans, and it's all you know. But one of the great parts about this ascension is it's never been done like this before. And so what makes this so exciting to me, getting to play at this level, is you're being asked to do something. You've been asked a long time ago to do this. That's why you're here. But you're being asked to do something that basically raises your consciousness back into all you are. But at the same time, it elevates the earth back to that 12th dimensional, fully Christed state of consciousness. That is a very big deal, because the earth is a very big deal in all that is. And it opens the door for all of humanity to step out of that 3rd dimensional state into that 5th dimensional and higher consciousnness. By doing that on this planet, you affect all that is. All that is affected by this creative shift. And it's enormous. But yet, I don't know that. I can only look out my window and see what I see, and whatever he said, I guess, is okay. So it's an evolution. It's a process to where I can say that to you, having reasonable awareness of what I'm saying personally, but you can only hear so much, and that's not an insulting statement at all, please. It's really, you can only hear what you can hear because the wiring is not connected. And so this process that I'm really scanning over as I'm kind of telling you these pieces is an evolution. And it's your evolution. And it's something where it's not a philosophy, it's not a religion, it's not a truth. I'm not even telling you a truth. I'm simply pointing to something, and the whole process of this journey that I get to play with you, and however we do that, is try this, what happened? That's it. Try this. What was your experience? Not important what your experience is. What is your experience? And my observation of many thousands now is there is a shift in who they are, how they present themselves, how they hold their energetic pattern, and many other things. Some will do it with magnificence. Some will kind of work at it and allow so much. But this process of building this light body takes you into a fifth dimensional state where the physicalness of this form begins to be altered on a molecular atomic scale physically, and the mental emotional awareness coupled with the soul's consciousness is how you experience yourself from that point on. So this process, and again, I've left out lots of pieces, not intentionally, just to kind of give you a awareness, but this process is all about you, 100% about you. It's something that there's no free lunch, there's no gift, there's no tap on the head with a wand. It is all about some assembly required. You have to do the work. Work's not really the right word. It's you have to basically show up and do what your next step is. Put the next footstep down on the ground and then experience yourself. So let's stop right there. There's a lot more I can say, but let me stop right there and let me answer some of your questions. Let's take the next half hour or 45 minutes or so and answer questions. I've given you a lot of information, and I've given you just a little bit of information in real terms. But what would you like to know? So let me turn this back to Roxane and ask questions mostly about what we just talked about here and or last week, if you would, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. So, Roxane.
Jim, this is a question from Sharon, who's in level 1. Can an older 65-plus beat-up body comfortably handle all the rewiring and amazing levels of light, especially as this thing progresses?
Yes. And so it's an interesting place that we've watched that if I had to say what is the age group that over the last 5-6 years has really focused in this work, I would say it's in the 40s to 70s. Probably mostly, what do you think, Roxane, 50s?
Yeah, 50s to 60s. Late.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing. Oh, there's younger people. But it's an interesting thing. And as I observe it, it really is, you've come, you've been embarrassed, you've been humiliated, you've been beat up, you've been, lied to, all those things. You've had all those experiences. And a lot of that was experience. And now you're at a place where you've always known there's something else is the common thread as people come into this. I've always known I was different, not better. I've always known there was something more. I always knew there was something good that was available, and I never understood the world. And a lot of people that play in this are hiders. They're very sensitive. They read energy. They're clairvoyant. They're clairaudient. They're telepathic. They're clairsentient. They feel the energy. And most of the time they would perceive other people's energy as something wrong with them. And so that probably fits most of you. And so we withdraw, we hide, we don't become really out there in some ways. But it's those who have gone through this. It's at this age, in a lot. I used to make fun. I think I said it this last week. When the creator said, "I have a new game," it was you who forced yourself to the front of the line and said, "Send me," because you were big enough to do that in a lot of ways. And so here you are. So the answer is absolutely yes. And is it easy? No. Is it hard? No. It's very simple, but to a great extent, many times, especially at the beginning of this, the first kind of year of all this work, is you're like a freight train at 90 miles an hour, and I'm the one who's going, turn right, turn right. You don't understand, you scream, I'm going to crash. Nah, yeah, I know, but turn right. And eventually you turn right. But it's a transition, not complicated, but it is different in some ways than how you perceived your world around you. And if you don't like the world around you, maybe this is an opportunity to begin to find words like certain and capable, stability, observation, choose, then act on your own terms. Hope that helps.